The two outsiders filled themselves with stew, and washed it all down with their last bottle of Piccolian wine, and then they settled down in comfort for their repose. Ealdred had intended a short sleep, and to be away early at the first light of dawn before the rest of the caravan emerged from their tents. But Ige had ideas of her own. She had not provided her Effendi with intimate comforts for the last few days of the preceding week, because one of the several customs that the Anglian and the Menggis cultures had in common was that they did not engage in sex during the days of menstrual bleeding. The previous night would have seen her make up for the days prior, but she was thwarted by the weather. In the midst of the wind called Riep Leccurin, the flayer of skin, they'd had no choice but to huddle down to sleep wrapped around in a blanket to keep out the lacerating dust. With Ealdred's leather doublet draped over his stallion's head to protect the beast's eyes, and Ige's linen smock doing likewise for her black gelding, they had slept sitting upright, with the bedroll over their heads. Consequently, they'd had to forego sex yet again. But now that there were no further impediments, Ige was firmly resolved to provide her man with intimate comforts tonight, tell its merchants or no tell its merchants. In short, Ige was feeling as randy as a stoat. Moreover, the bafflingly unnatural things which Ealdred had told her about the men of Gathkar had worried her far more than she had permitted him to notice. He had said that there was a political spell over the men in this monstrously aberrant country. The thought that perturbed her so seriously was that her Effendi was now inside the territory of this abnormal nation of masculine women and feminine men, and Ige wished to make certain that her own man was untainted and free from any contagion. She dreaded the thought that the foul disease perpetrated by the priestess cult might have infected him since they had crossed the Gathkar border. So she laid out their blanket far enough away from the campfires to bestow the privacy of shadow, and no sooner had Ealdred stretched himself out in comfort on the meagre bedroll than Ige was squirming down beside him to loosen his breeches at the groin. It did not take her beguiling fingers, captivating lips, and clever tongue more than a moment to rouse her Effendi to the full performance of his manly duties. Neither of them wore anything in the nature of undergarments, of course, for they were not the sort of decadent sophisticates who are so ashamed of their bodies that they have to wear clothing underneath their clothing. With the artful Menggis practising her sensual arts in earnest, they did not trouble to undress, for matters swiftly became too urgent. So adept was the skilful Ige in her erotic enticements, that even after her greybeard veteran had taken her vigorously from behind, to her considerable satisfaction, emptying his seed into her like the onset of the monsoon, he hauled her over his lap for a firm spanking from his belt. This was a sure sign that he was far from finished with her. Already quite convinced that she need have no worries on the subject of his having been infected by Gathkari effeminacy, she relaxed her mind and her flesh under the harsh repetition of the insistent whipping, and let the sharp stinging pain of the belt burn into her in its very familiar, and on this occasion very reassuring, manner. He had just flipped her over onto her back, the rocky ground smarting the fresh welts on her bottom through the thin barrier of the blanket, and he had just spread the supple girl's flexible legs to accommodate his muscular bulk between them, sinking into her with an erection that eased a sigh from her that was a blessing upon the gods for having made her a woman, when she looked over his brawny left shoulder and saw a grinning, swarthy, hook-nosed face smirking down at her. Over Ealdred's right shoulder she saw a second face, turbaned and fork-bearded, and fully as evil-looking as his brother's, chuckling as he stepped forward toward the couple fucking at his feet, raising a lantern the better to see where to strike with his sword. Ige cried out a warning. If the Anglian mercenary had outlived all the boys of his childhood, surviving his generation to reach the age of a true veteran, it was not only because of his fighting abilities with the spear and the knife. Having lived by the deaths of others, the issue resolved on the razor's edge of a blade in the blink of an eye, he was a man always ready to respond to threat. In the past, he had been attacked whilst squatting in the undergrowth emptying his bowels. He had been assailed whilst pissing against a tree and whilst guzzling drunkenly in his cups. This present attack was in fact the second time in his life that he had been pounced upon by brigands whilst he was enthusiastically at his fornication. Ige's inarticulate yelp of alarm might have been a squeal of pleasure, given her appetite for cock, yet that sixth sense of self-preservation which had been a steadfast friend to the mercenary all his life told him that death was but a fleeting instant from being thrust into his unprotected back. Without the least thought of looking to see where his enemies were, for a second spent craning his head around to assess the situation would likely prove fatal, he spun blindly to his left, taking Ige with him, gripping her to his chest, the pair of them rolling over and over into the shades of the night. Before the no longer grinning faces could cease their gawping at this unexpected turnabout, the girl had been tossed clear to one side, and the man had sprung after her, following her into still darker shadow. A filthy curse of vexation went up in the mongrel language of the Telitzim, and curved swords flashed in the reflected lantern light, flourished in anger. The brothers, Dephrim and Aphrim, had bethought themselves to sneak up upon the Westerner with the barbarously braided beard and slay him from behind, thereafter to rape his woman, for they had noticed the bounce of her breasts and the smooth skin of her bare legs as she had bent over amongst her cooking pots earlier that evening, and had decided that she was worth killing for. If she gave them pleasure when they raped her, they would keep her for themselves. If she did not, they would sell her for a slave when they reached Bool. Anticipating no difficulty, neither had bothered to put on any armour or chainmail. They were dressed only in their loose cotton travelling habiliments. But the murder had not gone to plan. The girl and her master had vanished into the night, and the brothers must find the western swine in order to kill him. Carrying the lantern, Dephrim rushed into the darkness in the direction that their quarry had disappeared, swinging wildly with his sword. Aphrim circled around in the hope that the white man, fleeing from the light of the lantern, might stumble out of the gloom right into him. Neither of the hunters called out, for they did not wish their fellows amongst the caravan to be involved in what was a private piece of business for the brothers alone. When Dephrim met Aphrim coming in the opposite direction, he almost carved him up, assuming the dark shape in front of him to be the Englian. The pair of them sighed in annoyance. Their quarry had fled. Exasperated, they trudged back to where the mercenaries' horses were tied. If they could not have the girl, they could at least steal the bastard's other possessions. But when they approached the horses, they found the man they had been hunting for standing there awaiting them, clad in helmet and mail shirt, and with his 7-foot ash spear levelled menacingly at their chests. The brothers chuckled as before. This western savage was a fool or a madman. He was only one, and they were two. Added to which, if they judged correctly from the strands of grey in his hair, he was their father's age. The man had no chance against them both.